Beth George. Beth George, a lecturer in architecture. She has a few fans at the back, no doubt. She's been an academic for 12 years or more, teaching design, drawing, urbanism at Curtin University and also at UWA. Beth has a PhD which was focused on urban curation and urban mapping, which she undertook in RMIT in 2009. Beth's a writer, she teaches and she practices in Perth. She's a critical thinker and an enthusiastic educator with great respect from her students. And of course we can expect some stimulating thoughts from Beth tonight, and we look forward to her presentation now.
I assure you, I did not write the last part of that myself. Thanks for the riffing. Okay, so I wanted to use this forum, like pretty much everyone else, to tease out some thoughts that before now have been somewhat private. So mine in particular are on the relationship between public art and the contemporary urban project. I'm coming at this, as Jeff said, from more of a background of architecture and urbanism. Okay, so in simple terms, I've been thinking for some time about these things, and you're all about to be subjected to my inner thoughts. Sorry. Okay, so why the conceit of placemaking? Well, others have kind of touched on that already. And what does it have to do with public art? Well, I think a fair bit. And my apologies to those who can't see anything of the slides. I didn't realise the vastness of the venue, or that the attendance would be so great. What you're looking at here is a little bit of text from a document that others have referred to. I don't know what I said that was funny, but...
Have you seen the screen?
Okay, just let it wash over you and imagine you can read a policy document, because that's what it is. So basically, this is a piece of the Percent for Art scheme. Okay. So mostly I want to talk about that relationship through the political, literally in terms of policy between art and placemaking. So I've been thinking particularly about the art that is commissioned alongside developments that both extend Perth and reinvent Perth. And this is a common form of procurement, obviously, because quite simply, if it were commissioned privately, it would be private art, even if it's in a public place. So it is essentially a gift from taxpayers to each other and the world. But there's another far more sinister reason why I relate the two, and that is about the use of art as a form, sometimes of apology for, or a gift wrapping of, or even as a tool used for the production of poor urban developments. So, what disturbs me about the vast nature of development in Perth over its colonised history, and this is not just a local problem, is that too often it represents the creation of a complete tabula rasa. So the ease with which we erase one landscape, be it built or unbuilt, and construct another is quite alarming at times and sometimes devastating. This new landscape, which is often suburban or built at relatively low density, universally speaking, might then be paired with public art, the brief for which very often includes the adding of meaning to its context. It becomes about the projection of image in both acts onto a territory cleared of its context. Literally like drawing on the landscape, the imposition of an idea at one-to-one scale. And this is not solely at work at the periphery of the city, while these images are from the periphery, because many an urban project approaches its extant territory in much the same way and through the same development practices, namely through parcellisation, the creation and naming of precincts, the illustration of a vision, the division and on-selling of individual lots, which may then play out with any luck something like the artist's impression that preceded it. So what disturbs me about Yeah, okay, well, we'll see. So, why do I hate the word placemaking? And I do. Because primarily it suggests a place has to be made. It denies utterly the pre-existing. It secondly suggests that what is proposed is singular and somehow conclusive. It suggests, to paraphrase Gertrude Stein, that there is no there. So first, to the making or remaking, as it may be. In some places, sites are levelled, vegetation removed, streets named Banksia Terrace or Acacia Drive are laid down, and then the art called for has to somehow, it might have the role of recalling what's now been removed. And I think, or rather hope, that we've moved away from this as a moment in our history and such ironies, but the sting of it kind of remains for me and persists at various levels. So I'm not suggesting that we repossess some version of our pasts, or that what is there should necessarily be ascribed value, particularly when remembering it entails recasting it as a kind of romanticising of the past. In fact, I advocate for precisely the opposite. As Doreen Massey suggests too, place is not local, not singular, and that place making entails the superposition of a culturally particular perception of the space-time continuum. I'm sorry if that sounds a little heavy, but basically, place simply does not mean the same thing between person to person, time to time, and so on, to put it simply. So, I don't believe in placemaking, no. I do believe in architecture, in landscape architecture, in infrastructure, in urbanism, and in art. And I don't feel that we need words beyond that sum it up as a single act. I believe in cities in the way that Manuel de Sola Morales describes them, as simply being a matter of things. For him, cities are not ideas, they are infrastructures, residences, squares, streets, commercial lots, and so on. But it's the curation of these things that, when they collide together, creating harmony sometimes, promiscuity sometimes, accident other times, makes a city. But they always begin with a there, and there is always a there. So, now that I'm knee-deep in ranting, I'll explain what I meant as art potentially being a tool for the process, and this has already been touched on this evening. Specifically, I'm talking about gentrification and the role that art plays within it. So, gentrification is, or once was, a naturally occurring thing. In metropolises where it has played out with far more vigour than here, it's a process that can actually be mapped. So the Dutch journal OASE, or OASE, documented various forms of the process in a really matter-of-fact way. And basically, regardless of whether you can read the text there, it goes, land is undesirable and cheap, so artists move into such territories because they can afford the space. Evidence of their making naturally emerges through studios and visible works and so on. Attendant programs follow, such as cafes and galleries. These things start to accrue. Wealthy joie de vivre catch wind and move into the scene. Land values rise. Artists who territorialise the spaces can no longer afford them. Now that's the dirty version. But there is a lovely state in between, and I don't for a moment deny that the moment of heterogeneity that lies somewhere in the middle of those processes is real and is desirable. But once something can be mapped, it can also be de-scienced, and it can be played out with expedience. And there are precedents where artists have been deliberately moved into specific sites in order to catalyse renewal and create cultural capital. And there are other foreign examples of public amenity, among them art, being a form of giving back to the public that can be exchanged for instance, extended building heights and so on. So there you have an explanation of how I see these things as being inextricably bound up, and with art, in the worst cases, becoming a kind of bargaining tool or a tidying up or a gift back to society. So nothing this sinister, I'm not claiming that anything like this is taking place in Perth, but it is fair to say that street art, perceived hipness and a public appetite for cool stuff exists. So at worst, we can see the commissioning of art as the first step in a synthesised gentrification process. You know, in the production of a perceived cultural value that may or may not have preceded it, and at best, or at most innocent, we can simply see an intention for the creation of a perception of public enjoyment and of vibrancy, so to speak. That's the word I definitely hear a lot. And the latter is probably closer to the truth. And I can imagine my boyfriend, who until recently was a planner, watching this and thinking, why do you have to ruin this? Don't you think it's good to dedicate a portion of public money to art? And, you know, and here, yes, art is never talked about here within the world of land speculation as a form of giving back. And it's there because, let's face it, it's bloody important to have art in the public realm. So suffice it to say, I love art, whatever that means. And you will note tonight I'm not actually talking about the art itself at all, but the getting of it and the brief for its creation. So the quote you can't see on screen right now is about how a paranoid person is someone for whom every observation confirms their truth. And I'm trying not to be a paranoid person. So, with Rem Koolhaas's wise words hovering above me, and before you run away because I'm a tree hugger, I'll take off the alfoil hat and talk about things that are safer to say. So first, it's safe to say that much of the art produced by this process is relatively safe itself. By being in the public realm, it essentially has to be G-rated. And at the same time, though, references, both clear and subtextual, have been made in many examples of public art, particularly, well. So, and there is, of course, that argument that commissioned art equals bad art and rogue art equals good, but of course, that's not the case. And of course, there are terrible and wonderful examples of both. Next, I think it's safe to say that there's a kind of an oxymoron inherent in the term public art. I'm not saying this because I think that every artist is some kind of recluse or hermit who is, you know, has no intention of being in the public world and who is simply, you know, following a thread of their own private mind through art. Of course not. But that, like many other practices, architecture for instance, the creation of it and the process embedded in it and the thoughts that sit behind it is deeply individual. And I think, you know, I really enjoyed, Marcus, your explanation of the Rainbow Project, and the fact is we don't get the words and the explanation sitting alongside the art. There is no plaque that tells you what the person's idea was. We simply rely on what it appears to be and how it communicates in whatever way we receive it. And as to my initial rant, it's also safe to say that the kinds of development that have served development projects are largely savoury and largely call for savoury public art, and both often strive to make a place or make sense of a place and offer up an identity or a vision. And this is about the overlaying of one's vision potentially across a patch of earth or building or otherwise that cannot itself brook an argument or tell a story. And furthermore, why should the poor old artist be lumped with the task of constructing greater meaning or the story of a place? That seems an ungainly task to me. It's certainly not one I would want to take on. So, put quite simply, and you know, I think both of our, you know, the whole of the first session before the break was really about this. Places exist. If you ask if there is a there, resoundingly I would say yes, regardless of what that there is. I am a fan of dirty realism, of places accrued and accreted in time, of bits that are endemic, of bits that are inherited, invented, bastardised, whatever, they exist. Furthermore, of the legibility of that time and that process, and of thoughtful mediations. And what I would advocate in both development and its artefacts, whether those are built or painted or sculptural, is that they be specific. Not confronting necessarily, not critical per se, but specific. And yet here I have to catch myself, because one of my favourite public works is this one in Barcelona, and it's just beautiful, and I like it because it is simply beautiful and it's a mesmerising thing, and hopefully this link will work. This is a film taken by a friend of mine named Stephen Collier in Porto. Can't seem to embiggenate it, sorry. There's sound too, the sound of the wind that's moving the thing around. Does this work fit my demands for specificity? It's round and it sits in a traffic circle. Does that make it specific? It floats on the breeze, so yes, in ways it responds to its site, but also why is my slide not working? I think maybe I have to escape from the last one. There it is, seen from above. But when you look up the artist, she's done many similar sculptures in various locations, so certainly this project is not entirely specific to its site or its setting. And to me, this raises another point, which is not a bad thing. Our bodies of work as a practice are usually about a pursuit, and that's often ongoing and often iterative. Sometimes it's obsessive. Not only should work not necessarily have to be site-specific, it should not have to be responsive necessarily to anything. So I reserve the right of meaninglessness for art and for architecture. So after all of that, perhaps what it's best to offer up are some rights. And my students know I like these. I prefer rights to rules. The first one I've stolen from a hero, Michael Sorkin, and it is that we should have the right to a city free to elaborate the basis of its own distinctiveness. Whatever it is, and it has peculiarities, and even if certain things are global, they've also found their own interpretation locally. So, yeah. The next is the right to, and I've crossed out public art and maybe said instead art in public. The next is the right to know art, and perhaps this might have been the right response for some of the examples given earlier. There's a fantastic edition of a journal called Volume called Doing Almost Nothing, and it states that sometimes the most powerful act is to not undertake a project at all. The next is the right to tell the real story, so not the fiction and not the idealised version of the story, but what you might perceive as a real one. And the next is the right to tabula rasa, in which I was thinking, well, okay, if the setting for the art has not done the job of meaning making, why should you? So does that not give you absolute license to go completely batshit mental and do something utterly uncalled for? Like say batshit at a forum. The next is the right to private foray in a public place, and this is really, again, against that idea of necessarily making something important or that everyone can understand or everyone can share. And lastly, which I think has been the subtext throughout what I've been saying, is the right to intelligent procurement. And I think that's already been talked to in detail this evening. So I think that in the way that we write briefs, in the way that they're executed, in the way that they're examined by so many parties that have to basically make them permissible to carry out, is this the right way to make work? I'm not sure. So there's some thoughts. Thanks for staying till the end.